Hi everyone, this is just a little tutorial video on how to wash your trumpet. There's going to be a link in the description to a document where you can read through the steps and maybe print that out and have that by your side as you go. But this video I'm going to explain all the different steps. So let's get started and collect all the things we're going to need to wash our trumpet. Here you can see everything we're going to need except of course the trumpet itself. Let me talk through everything we've got here. Firstly, we're going to need some just simple dishwashing detergent. Then you're going to want a soft cloth, like this yellow one here. You can see it's a bit dirty because I've been using it for quite a while, but something like this will do as well. Just a nice small soft cloth. You're going to want an old toothbrush, or a new one will work I guess, but you're not going to want to use it again for brushing your teeth after you clean your trumpet with it. Valve oil, which you should already have if you've been playing trumpet for a little while. And you're going to want some steel wool. Do not use this sort of steel wool, if you can see that. This harsher, coarser steel wool that you might be familiar with for scrubbing really sort of caked on things on your dishes. Don't use this. You have to use this softer steel wool. I've got this stuff here, Stilo, which you can get here in Australia. This is what I use. Next up are a couple of specialty tools, but I also have a couple of things here you can use instead. So I have this cleaning snake. This is, I think, specifically designed for brass instruments, but you can probably get one that's designed for plumbing and things like that that will do the same job. So this is just a nice long snake with a little cleaning brush on either end so that we can clean on the inside. If you don't have one of these, or you don't really want to pick one up, you can get a pipe cleaner and take a little bit of that soft cloth that we talked about before and tie it on so that you're going to be able to pull it through the trumpet. The next thing is a mouthpiece brush. You can see here I've got a mouthpiece brush here specifically. If you don't have one of these, a pipe cleaner should do just fine. You're also going to want a towel that you don't mind getting a little bit dirty to sit the trumpet on. So this needs to be big enough for the trumpet to sit across it. You'll also need a kettle, a tall mug, and a bath or a sink that will be big enough to fit your trumpet in. So once you've got all your equipment, the next step is to fill up the bath or the sink, if you're using a sink, with nice warm water and some detergent so it's nice soapy water. Let's do that now. Now, you're going to need to fill up your bath so that it's deep enough that your trumpet is going to be entirely submerged when it's laying on its side. So, as we're waiting for that bath to fill, let's start taking apart the trumpet. The most important thing to remember when you're taking apart the trumpet is be really careful with all the little bits and pieces. If you have any small pieces on your trumpet, make sure not to misplace them. Maybe put them in a bowl or something, or somewhere safe where you're not going to forget them, not going to lose them. Especially if you're working in a bathroom, you don't want to drop these things into one of the little drains in the floor or down your sink. You don't want to lose them. They can be quite expensive to replace. So be really careful with all of your parts. Let's sort of dissect our trumpet and see what we can take apart from it. So the first thing obviously is the mouthpiece. We know that comes off, so we're going to start with taking the mouthpiece out. The next thing is our slides. So the first one obviously is our tuning slide here. We can pull that out. Oh, look at that. Whoop. Be careful when you're pulling these out that you don't damage them. They might be a little bit stiff, especially if your trumpet hasn't been washed in a little while. You can see mine's quite dirty there. So we're going to get rid of that in a second. So that's the tuning slide. We can also take out the first valve slide. When you're taking out the valve slides, these three here, make sure before you do, you push down the valve that they're associated with. So I'm about to pull this first valve slide down. I push down the first valve, and then I pull that out there. Right. We can do the same with the second valve. There it is. And with the third valve slide, yours might come out easily, but if yours is like mine, it might have this little setup here, which normally stops it from sliding out. So we're going to need to take that apart. So if you have one like mine, we can unscrew these little things here. They're quite tight. There we go, loosen them up. And these are the little parts that I say you don't want to lose. So when we screw these out, I'm going to be really careful not to drop it on the floor. Right. So those two little bits there, and also the little rubber washer, we don't want to lose that. Now these pieces, those small pieces, make sure you don't lose them. There they are. Now, I'm going to take the third valve slide out, like so. Now, some trumpets, you can see the third valve slide You see that little line there? This section might come off as well. If it does for you, you want to pull it out. Mine's a bit stiff. I'm not going to bother with that today, but if yours does and you can pull it off without hurting yourself or damaging the instrument, take that off as well. And now you can see we've collected all our slides and we have the body of the trumpet here. Now, we also want to take off the bottom valve caps. So we can unscrew those there. There's 3 of them, and we take those out as well. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the valves out, but I'm always going to take them out one at a time so I don't misplace them. Especially if you don't have your valves numbered. You see mine here, this valve says number 1, right? You can see that maybe a little bit blurry there, but there's a 1 printed on there, so I know that this is the first valve. If yours don't have that, do not take them all out at the same time because it will be really a lot of a hassle to sort them out. So what we're going to want to do with our valves is take it out just a little bit, unscrew the top, the little finger cap, take that off, don't misplace it. We take off the little cover there, and then you should have this little felt ring here. We want to actually take that out, okay? And put that with our little things that we don't want to get lost. Now, if you're really careful, you can lay them out in order so you know which one is which. But once we've done that, we want to put the valve back together nice and gently. It doesn't have the felt, so we don't want to push it around too hard because it might get damaged. But we just want to put that back together, and we want to repeat that process for each of the valves. So we just take that little felt stem out, but we leave the valve in for the wash. Now when you're taking apart your valves for the wash, be really careful. They have lots of moving pieces, and only take apart the ones that you need and put them right back together again. Especially if you're new to the trumpet, do not fiddle around with more than one valve at a time. Do your valves one at a time so you don't crisscross any pieces between them, accidentally put the wrong valve in the wrong hole. Just stick to one at a time, take one valve out, put it back in, screw it up, and then move to the next one. Now that our bath is nice and full and sudsy with all this soap, we're going to put the trumpet in. So to do this, that's what this towel here is for. We're going to lay that down on the base of the bath. It might be a little bit tricky because it will wet. It's wet and it might want to float around in the water, but it will sit down nice and easy once the trumpet is put on it with a weight. This is mainly to keep your bath and your trumpet safe from scraping against each other. So we're going to put this towel at the bottom of the bath. So the next step is we're going to separate our mouthpiece. The mouthpiece doesn't go in the bath. We're going to do something else with that. So just put that aside. And then let's take the body of the trumpet, what we have left. Now with no slides in and no valve caps, we're going to put that in the bath. Nice and gentle, and lay it on top of that towel. Hopefully you can see through the soap that I've laid the trumpet down on that towel. A little bit of this bell sticking out, that's fine, but you see all of it is submerged in the water. Next we're going to take our slides and put those in. Be careful and be nice and gentle when you're putting them in, that they're laying down on that cloth and they're not going to rub against the trumpet as you put them down. But we're going to put all those in there. You see they're releasing some air as they go in. And we'll take our 3 valve caps. 1, 2, 3. And put those in there as well. And these little parts, these felt rings, we want to keep them dry. We don't want to put them in the bath. So now that our trumpet is in the bath, we're going to leave it in there for a little amount of time. And what we're going to do is reach our hand in. We're going to reach in and wiggle the valves around a little bit so that the water goes through the valve chambers. And then we're going to leave that in there for a little while. Around 20 minutes to half an hour is a good amount of time. And every 5 minutes or so, come in, shake the valves around a little bit to circulate some water, and then leave it to sit. While that's sitting in there, let's take our mouthpiece. Fill up your kettle and bring it to a boil. Take your mouthpiece and put it into the mug, like so. And once your kettle is boiled, make yourself a nice cup of mouthpiece. Fill it up enough that the mouthpiece is covered, the water level is above the mouthpiece, and we're just going to leave that to sit for a while. Once our trumpet is finished sitting in the bath for about 20 to 30 minutes, we're going to take it out and lay it out on, I have another towel here, but you can just use the same wet towel from the bath. The main thing is you don't really want it sitting on a tiled floor or something like that in case it gets damaged. As you take the trumpet out, Just make sure to tip it in a few different directions, and don't do this with one hand, but you won't have a camera. Wiggle the valves around, and just make sure you've gotten as much water out of it as possible. Now that we've got all the parts out and laid out, let's start with cleaning. We're going to start with the slide. Okay, so we're going to start with these slides. Take the steel wool, the soft steel wool I mentioned earlier, and we're going to rub these dull bits. You can see we've got the nice finish of the trumpet, and then these dull bits. We're going to take the steel wool and sort of scrub away at that. And we're going to get it to the point that it starts to look nice and clean. And if you've got any rust spots, like you might have seen that blue rust, that blue mold, that's already gone. But you see here some orangey, browny rust. I'm going to try and get that. You can see now I've finished scrubbing most of this side. It's much clearer and cleaner and brighter, whereas this is what it used to look like before. I haven't done this side of it yet. So you want this part, you want those dull bits to look like this one here. And we're going to do the same process for all the other slides. And if your trumpet has these dull bits on the actual body, like here and here, you can see on some of my slides, some trumpets have it here or here as well. You're going to want to scrub those as well. Just be careful to try not to scrub the finish too much, and just keep your scrubbing to the dull bits. You might have to be a bit careful with the underside, but just do as much as you can. And the next thing you want to do is take these bottom valve caps and clean them with this old toothbrush from before. You see mine are pretty clean currently, but yours might have a little bit more of that mold in there and grime. So just clean that away with the toothbrush. You can always feel free to dip parts of the trumpet back into the bath if you feel they need a little bit of water or soap to help with the clean. Right. And the last thing is we're going to want to take the snake, if you have one, or the little solution I mentioned earlier, the pipe cleaner and the cloth here, and we're actually going to run that through the different parts of the trumpet. So I'm sending it through the lead pipe here. And on the other side, just be careful, it's going to burst out probably, and it's going to be possibly quite dirty when it does. Oh, look at all that gunk. That's nasty. So just be careful where that's going to end up. That's why it's good to have a towel on the ground. I'm going to pull that out and be the same, a little bit careful when it comes out. There we go. And you're going to want to do that, passing the tube through. You can also stick it down the end. Now, when you're passing the tube through the different valve chambers, right, it's only going to go through these a little way and then come back out because of the valve stopping it. So don't feel like you have to get it through to the other side of something. Just clean a little bit in there, and that should be enough with the snake. Alright, next thing we're going to do is take our valves, like I said before, one at a time, always taking them out of the trumpet, and just give them a little rub down with this little soft cloth from before. Your valves should be mostly pretty clean, but if they're really dirty, give them a little bit more of a scrub, and the underside in particular, you might want to give it a little bit of attention. You don't want to be too aggressive when you're cleaning the valves, because they need to maintain a nice smooth surface so that they're moving back and forth. So if they're really dirty, try as gently as you can to get it off, but mostly your valves should stay pretty clean. And once it's done, we can put them back in one at a time. Now, a couple of things I forgot to mention is with the snake, you can also run that through the slides when we have them individually. And another thing is, if you're using this steel wool, this soft steel wool, sometimes the soft steel wool comes with this soapy stuff on it. You can see this yellow sort of stain on the towel. That will come off straight away. That's just some soap. But you can see it's actually all over the trumpet as well. So you want to give your trumpet a rinse if it's got that stuff on it before putting it back together. You can leave it out to dry for a little bit, or sort of dry it down with a cloth. If you've got any of that soap stuff on there, just give it a rinse and pat it down with a cloth to get rid of all of that soap. And once that's done, we're going to start to put the trumpet back together again. The first thing we want to do is put the slides back in. And you may have heard that you want to put Vaseline on your slides. That is not true. Don't put Vaseline on your slides. It's not necessary. We want our slides to be able to move freely. Even the ones that stay mostly intact, like this tuning slide, we need it to be able to move so that we can retune. So don't put Vaseline, it actually clogs up the trumpet. We just regular clean is enough to keep everything moving nice and smooth. Now, before we put our valve slides in, these ones here, we actually want to make sure our valves are in the proper position. We've been moving them around a little bit. We want to make sure that they're all locked into place. Now, when we take our valves out, we obviously want to make sure that there's no water trapped in there. You see this one's still a little bit wet. So we can dry that one up with a little cloth. Make sure there's no excess water. A little bit's going to be okay, but ideally we want it to be as dry as possible. Now, when we put it back in, we want to line it up so that these little tabs here on either side line up with the spaces that are inside the valve chamber. And to do that, if you've got printing on, make sure it's just facing the same way as before. Lower it in, make sure you're not turning it at all, and then screw it into place with this section, and then tighten that up here. We can do that one at a time for the valves, and once your valves are dry, before you screw them into place, we can actually replace the felt and put that back into its position just there, which I'm going to do now. Alright, so once I've got that felt back in place, just putting the valve in like that and screwing it back up. Right. Now, the reason we want to make sure our valves are all good before we put the slides on is because, just like when we took them off, we pushed the valve down and then took it off, we're going to do the same thing when we put the valve back on. So we push the valve down and then we slide the valve slide back into place like so. Now, when you're putting on your third valve slide, that's this one here into here, and the first valve slide, we can actually put a little bit of valve oil onto them. We normally only oil the insides of the valves, but these slides, 1 and 3, we actually want to be able to move them smoothly. So, because that will help with some of our tuning. So we can just put a little bit of valve oil on those, not too much, a little bit is enough, just those little drops, so that when we move these, they're going to move nice and smooth. That's what we want. Now, that's why we actually want our valves and all the parts of the trumpet to be dry before we put them back together. Because if there's water and oil in there, as you know, water and oil don't mix. And they're going to move up against each other in the valve chamber and create a build-up of liquid in there. So we want all the parts of the trumpet to be dry before we put it back together, so that when we add oil in to the insides of the valves and the valve slides, there's just that oil in there and no other liquid. Remember again, as you are taking your valves apart and putting them back together again, remember to only do one valve at a time so you don't mismatch any pieces. So once your trumpet's all cleaned and put back together, you can oil your valve slides, the third valve slide and the first valve slide, oil your valves themselves and make sure they're all in place, and your trumpet should be ready. But what about that mouthpiece? By now, probably the water in your mug here will have cooled down enough that you can take the mouthpiece out. And this is where we take the little mouthpiece cleaner, if you've got one, or a pipe cleaner, and we're just going to thread that through the mouthpiece, probably over a sink, because some gunk might come out as we push it through. Hard to do with one hand, but there we go. Oh, you can see that gunk starting to come out. There it is. And we're just going to rinse that off in the sink. There we go. We're just going to pull that back through and just give our mouthpiece a nice rinse so that as much of that gunk as possible is gone. Once that's all taken care of, we can take our mouthpiece and put it back into the trumpet, and we should be good to play. Play a little bit. I like to do this in the bathroom just because I really like the reverberation we get. Beautiful. If If you hear any gurgling, there might still be some water trapped somewhere in the trumpet. So just pull your slides out one at a time, or empty your spit valves. Try and get that water out of there. And if you feel like you have a stoppage of air, like your air's not being able to get through when you play, that kind of thing, it might be because one of your valves has been put in the wrong way. So just take it out, make sure it's lined up properly, and re-screw it in, and you should be good to go with a nice new clean trumpet. It will look really nice and clean. It will play really nice and clean. Your valve slides hopefully will move nice and smooth, especially if you've oiled them up. And there you go. Clean up your mess, and you're ready to keep playing.